All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Nisan, Czinn Teri Kahn Czinn, for dedicating all of the shiurim and drushos this month in honor of their grandson, Adin Tzvi Hochbaum, to thank Benjamin and Elys Wohl from Eretz Yisrael for dedicating all of the shiurim and drushos this month in honor of those who create the opportunity for our Torah to be heard in Meretz Hashem beyond the confines of the Beis Midrash, of this Beis Midrash. So with special gratitude to Moishe Abramson and to Jeremy Lasson. To thank Shimmy Batsheva Messing for dedicating all the Shimon drushos this month in honor of the Bas Mitzva of their daughter Lilah. And to thank Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all the Shimon drushos in memory of Paul's parents, Shmuel ben Zechariah, Leah bas Avrohom, and his great-grandmother Tziril bas Rav Dov. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for Parak Arvei Pesachim, Moishe and Rabbi Abramson for dedicating the Parak and the Schus of Refuah Shalema for Daniel Meir ben Chana, and to thank Menachem and Susie Schoenfeld for dedicating the Shir in the Zechus of Refuah Shlema for David Kalman ben Tovia Chotel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah.
And a welcome back to Saeed.
And a welcome back to and a welcome back to Saeed. That's a double sponsorship. We'll bill you twice for that. Meretz Hashem. Excellent. Good. Yes. So we thank all of our sponsors for their incredible generosity, ongoing generosity. Hope that all of the neshamas have an aliyah. All of those who need a refuah in Meretz Hashem to have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael, and hope that in Meretz Hashem more and more of our beloved Chaverim continue to come back to the shir in person in Meretz Hashem. And we'll say with that, let us begin. Another incredible daf ahead of us today. Again, today we spent the last couple of days, I think yesterday you would all agree that the Agarita, and this wasn't just the Agarita, that the concepts we saw in yesterday's daf were just overwhelming, especially the way we ended the daf with the Suda of Mashiach, and who was leading benching. Incredible, and tape it. But right, so the Mishnah. But today we'll transition a little bit more back into some of the halachos concerning the Seder. Another great sugya. So today's daf is Kuf Chaf 120. We are picking up from the Mishnah Kuf Yud Tes Amud Beis 119b, and we are picking up again. Mishnah says, Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikomen. So I will say, this is actually a very cryptic Mishnah, because when you first read it, it's not clear exactly what the Mishnah is saying. And in fact, we're going to see this one line is the source of incredible dispute and debate. It literally means, in maftir and achara Pesach, which we would normally translate as maftir, afterwards. We don't take leave of the Pesach. Afikoman. Now, what afikoman means, again, is not immediately clear. One thing is clear, is it does not appear to be a Hebraic word, or at least, again, not in its pure form, not a standalone Hebraic word. So let's see. Says the Gemara, Ma afikoman? What's afikoman? Amarav shal ya'akru mechabura lechabura. Very interesting. So Rav says, it means that you should not go ahead and go from one chabura to another chabura. You shouldn't transition from one group to another group when consuming the Karban Pesach. Look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Rashbam says, Amarav shal ya'akru mechabura lechabura. Achar sha'achlu ha'pesach bechabura, lo yelchu bechabura achares. Le'echol. Lo pas v'lo shum davar. So we'll say, according to Rab, this is a very interesting halacha. Once you've consumed the Karban Pesach in one chabura, you shouldn't go to another group to eat something else. Now, we'll say, remember, we've already established, it goes without saying, you can't eat your Karban Pesach in two locations, right? That we've already established. But halacha l'maaseh, what Rav is adding on is that once you ate your Karban Pesach in one group, you shouldn't go to another chabura to eat anything, to eat bread, or to eat anything else. What are we concerned about? Gzeira del ma'asi l'meicha l'asa Pesach b'shnei makomos. Ultimately, again, because we're concerned that what's going to happen if we allow you to eat on the course of Pesach night in two places. Now, remember, there's a very specific din. Once you've consumed Karban Pesach in one place, you shouldn't go and eat somewhere else out of concern that you may come to what? End up eating the Karban Pesach itself in two locations. And of course, again, as we've already established, that is halachically problematic. So the Rashbam goes on. If you look at the end of that Rashbam, he says, Ularav haki mashmale. Now, I'm in the wide lines of the Rashbam, about 5 lines in. Ularav haki mashmale afikomen afiku meinaichu. Hotzi kelechem mikan v'neilech lekan b'makom acher. So we'll say, interestingly enough, so Rav says the word afikoman literally means afik kaman. Let us leave here and go somewhere else. Let us leave here. Afik means let's go out. Come on, from before us. Let us go out and take our utensils elsewhere. So according to Rav, the Mishnah is teaching me the following. Ein maftirun achar Pesach afikoman means once you've consumed the Korban Pesach in one location, you cannot eat any food in a different location. Out of a concern that if we allow you to eat any food in a different location, you will come to eat the Pesach in two locations. Shmuel disagrees. He says, no. Amar Kigon or Dilaili Vigozlaya La'aba. So ultimately, again, Shmuel says, what it actually means is, once you ate Korban Pesach, you can't eat dessert. What's an example of dessert? So Shmuel says, for someone like me, or Dilai are mushrooms and truffles. For me, that's what I eat for dessert. And for Abba, he eats young pigeons for dessert. Right? That was a good dessert. Right? So we'll say, if you look at the Rashbam again, Rashbam says again, Kigon, or Dilai li v'gozlai la Abba, the Rav, the Shmuel Habaragi Alecha B'Kinuach Suda, Kimina Picha. So we'll say Abba over here is a reference to Rav. So ultimately, Shmuel used to eat mushrooms and truffles for dessert. The Rav Ragi Alecha Achar Suda, so gozlos. That's a dessert, right? A meat dessert, right? Young pigeons for dessert. V'lashon afikoman hotziu v'haviu mine mesika. So we'll say, interestingly enough, afikoman according to Shmuel means apikaman, literally remove the meal from us and bring in dessert. So here's what's interesting. What is Shmuel coming to add? Shmuel is coming to say, it goes without saying that you can't go ahead and once you've finished your Korban Pesach, of course you can't go somewhere else to eat. Shmuel is adding something additional, which is what? Even in your own place, you can't eat anything after Korban Pesach. There's no dessert. Korban Pesach is the dessert. There is no dessert after Shabbos. It's a fascinating machlokes between Rav and Shmuel about how to interpret this phrase. Rav says, halacha l'maisa means, once you ate your Korban Pesach in your location, you cannot go and eat anything else, anywhere else, out of a concern that you may come to go ahead and eat your Korban Pesach in two locations. But I will say, what's interesting according to Rav, can you have dessert at home? Bepashtos, yes. Doesn't sound like that's a problem, right? According to Shmuel, in Maftir Achar Pesach Afikoman, ultimately again means you can't have dessert in your own makom. It goes without saying that you can't go somewhere else to eat anything out of the same concern that Rav had. But halacha l'maisa, you're not even allowed to bring out dessert. Incredible. Says the Gemara. Rav Chanina bar Shila, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Kigon Tmarim Uklayos ve'egozim. I will say Rabbi Chanina bar Shila and Rabbi Yochanan are agreeing with Shmuel that afikoman means dessert. I will say again, according to both of them, I just want to point out, afikoman is a contraction. According to Rav, apik kaman, take out the utensils and let's take it somewhere else, to go eat somewhere else. According to Shmuel, apik kaman, remove from before us the meal so that we can bring out dessert. So ultimately, it's a contraction of two words. The two words being afikoman, apik, take out, kaman in front of us. So we'll say Rav Chanina bar Shila and Rabbi Yochanan are agreeing with Shmuel. They're just giving different examples of desserts. So for example, again, we eat tamarim uklayos, dates, dried kernels of wheat, ve'egozim and nuts. Tanya Kavasi Rabbi Yochanan, Bryce that supports Rabbi Yochanan, in maftir achar Pesach, kigon tamarim, klayos, ve'egozim. What's an example of in maftir achar Pesach afikoman? That we do not bring out fruit, right, wheat kernels and nuts. So I will say the Brisa seems to support Shmuel's ruling or Shmuel's interpretation over Rav, namely in maftir nachar Pesach afikoman means we don't eat dessert after we eat the afikoman. Ultimately, again, and I both say, by the way, what's Shmuel's logic? In other words, why can't I eat dessert after Korban Pesach? What's the problem? So if you go back to that Rashbam for just a moment, can go in ardiloi liva goes laya la'aba. If you look at the end of that, Rashbam, he says, Asr lecho klum achar Pesach shelo yovad. In the Rashbam, so just 6 words, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 lines up from the bottom of the Rashbam. Asr lecho klum achar Pesach shelo yovad mimeno tam Pesach. We'll say, because the idea of Shmuel is, we don't want you to lose the flavor of Korban Pesach. We don't want you to lose the flavor. We want the flavor of the Pesach to remain in your mouth. So we'll say, Korban Pesach is interesting because remember, it's Necha al Hasova. Right, remember, Bismana Mikdash, unless it was a year like this year, where Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, what would you eat for your main meal? On Pesach night, what would you eat for your main meal? Your chagiga, excellent. You'd eat your chagiga for your main meal, and Korban Pesach would be your dessert. The reason Korban Pesach is your dessert is because you want that flavor to remain in your mouth. That's what we want. Therefore, Shmuel's logic is, we don't want you eating dessert. Because if you eat dessert, what's going to happen? Your chocolate-covered Pesach marshmallows are going to be the only thing that you're tasting, right, for the next couple of hours. We want the Korban Pesach. Therefore, Shmuel says, Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikoman, nothing to do with change of locations. Even in the same location, nothing is consumed after the Pesach. So the Gemara goes weiter. Amar Yehuda Shmuel, Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikoman. So Rabbi Yehuda said, name of Shmuel, we don't eat dessert. Actually, let's say it like this. Let's just use the phrase. Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikoman. Tanan, Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikoman. I'm sorry. I read it up. In maftirin achar matzah afikoman. So listen to this. Rabbi Yehuda quotes a statement in the name of Shmuel that we do not eat dessert after the matzah. We do not eat dessert after the matzah. But yet our Mishnah said what? Tanan in maftirin achar pesach afikoman. Achar pesach chudelo avala achar matzah maftirin. So we'll say, interesting enough, now the Gemara raises an interesting point. Rabbi Yehuda says, it's interesting because we have a statement of Shmuel where Shmuel says you don't eat any dessert after you eat matzah. But yet our Mishnah says that this din is only a din by what? Korban Pesach. So which one is it? To which the Gemara says, Lo mi bai kamar. Lo mi bai achar matzah. Delo nafish tamayhu. So we'll say, it goes without saying. It goes without saying what? It goes without saying that you cannot eat any dessert after we eat our matzah. Remember, we'll say after we eat our afikoman, our matzah. Why? Because matzah has a quote-unquote weak taste. So if you eat your afikoman, you eat your matzah, and then you eat dessert afterwards, it's clear that what? That the taste of the matzah is going to be removed from your mouth. However, I would have thought, but I might have thought that when it comes to the Korban Pesach, again, that roasted lamb has a strong flavor. I would have said that flavor would remain even if I would eat dessert, and it wouldn't be a problem. Therefore, maybe I should be able to eat dessert after Korban Pesach. Kamash malon, though. Kamash Rabosai, that the din of ein maftirin achar Pesach afikoman applies both to if you're eating the actual Korban Pesach, as well as if you're just eating a piece of matzah, zechar the Korban Pesach. Either way, that which I am eating, either as Korban Pesach or the zechar Korban Pesach, must be the last thing I consume that night. Name of Messiah, let's bring a brayso that supports this. Interesting case. Hasufganin v'had duvshanin v'iskaritin. So we'll say this is fascinating. So duvshanin is sponge matzah. Incredible, right? So we'll say sponge matzah, kishmal kenhu. It's a sponge cake like matzah. Duvshanin is a honey matzah, and iskaritin was like a wafer matzah. So the Gemara says, Adam emali kreisumen. Now, we'll say, now these are all examples of today, probably what we would call like matzah ashira. You can't use it for the mitzvah of matzah, but it's not chametz. So you could eat it, according to the Gemara, over Pesach, but you cannot use it for the mitzvah of matzah. So we'll say, therefore, listen to this idea. So this type of, we'll call it these specialty matzahs. Adam amali kreisumen, you can eat as much of it as you want. But again, you must make sure that on the night of the Seder, on the night of Pesach, the last thing you eat is a kezayis of bona fide matzah. Right? The kezayis of what we'll call shmura matzah. So the Gemara makes an interesting observation. Bachrona in top of kufchaf barishon alo. But see, now what's very interesting, when can you fill up on the sponge matzah, on the honey matzah, on the wafer matzah? When can you do this? Only assuming you could eat those first, but your actual kezayis of what we call matzah's mitzvah must be the last thing you eat. Why? So that the taste remains in your mouth. Because remember, if I eat my kezayis of matzah first, and then I have my honey matzah, my sponge matzah, that's what I'm going to taste in my mouth. The taste of the matzah won't be there. To which the Gemara said, Lo mi bai kamar. To which the Gemara said, maybe not. Lo mi bai barishona. So listen to this. So the Gemara says, maybe it goes without saying that I could actually eat my real matzah first. Because if I eat my real matzah first, I'm eating it with an appetite. But I might have thought that I both say, if I'm eating all these other types of matzahs, the spun matzah, the sponge matzah, the honey matzah, that maybe again I can't eat my real matzah last because it may be achila gasa. Right? They will say achila gasa is gluttonous eating. To which the Gemara says, kamash malon, not kamash malon. Perhaps the Gemara is teaching me that even if you eat the real matzah last, ultimately again, you still fulfill the mitzvah. So we'll say, so I just want to point out, what the Gemara is trying to highlight over here is this idea, is Rav Yehuda coming and contrasting, does this din of ein maftir and achar Pesach afikoman, is it just a din in Pesach, or is it a din in matzahs afikoman as well? And I will say, of course, this has a dramatic halacha l'maisa implication for us. Everyone agrees that halacha l'maisa, when you eat the carbon Pesach, that must be the last thing you eat that night. Everyone agrees on that. The shaila is, does that halacha apply to the piece of matzah, that what we call the afikoman, that you are eating zecher Pesach or not? That's the discussion that's happening over here. So the Gemara says, Marzutra Masniachra. Marzutra had a different version of the previous exchange. He said, Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Maftirin achara matzah afikoman. Let's listen to this. In this version, Rav Yehuda said in Shmuel, Maftirin achara matzah afikoman, that you could eat afikoman after matzah, which means you could have dessert after the matzah that you eat for afikoman. So also we could support this idea by saying as follows, because what did the Mishnah say? Well, so the Mishnah was very specific. The Mishnah said, the prohibition to have dessert is dafka in the case of Karban Pesach, but it doesn't apply when you don't have a Karban. To which the Gemara says, Achar Pesach udela achol, Achar matzah maftirin. Ultimately, again, what do you see? It's only after the Karban Pesach itself that you can't eat dessert. But after matzah, you do have the ability to go and have dessert. To which the Gemara says, maybe not. Lo mi bai kamar. So we'll say, lo mi bai, remember again, is the stylistic phrase. That means you didn't have to say this and certainly this. The Gemara says, lo mi bai, achar matzah delo nafish taimei. So we'll say, it goes without saying that after, in other words, you could interpret it as follows. The Mishnah doesn't have to say that you can't have dessert after matzah. Why not? It's obvious. Why is it obvious? Because matzah itself has a very weak taste, or perhaps better stated, no taste, right? So because matzah has no taste, or a weak, quote-unquote, weak taste, obviously you can't eat anything afterwards, because if you eat dessert, the dessert will totally wipe out the taste of the matzah. Aval achar Pesach emalo, but again, after Karban Pesach, which ultimately, again, has a very strong taste, I might have thought that halacha l'maisa, I am permitted to eat dessert afterwards. Kamash malono, kamash on that halacha l'maisa, you're not allowed to eat dessert after Karban Pesach as well. Good. Meisveis, the Gemara is the kasha. So we'll say this is just Marzutra has a different version of the previous Gemara. So Meis, the Gemara is the kasha. Hasov ganin, v'haduv shonin, v'askaritin, these specialty matzahs. Adam memale kreso mehen. Person could fill up his stomach from those specialty matzahs. In other words, eat whatever, however much you want of the specialty matzahs. Provided that you eat a kizayis of matzah shmura, real matzah, at the end. So a very important inference. What do you see from here? Ba'achrona in berishon alo. What is the Gemara telling me? That I dafka have to eat the matzah's mitzvah at the end, but not at the beginning. Why? Well, Pashtus, what it means is because if I eat it at the beginning, and then I eat my honey matzah, my sponge matzah afterwards, those specialty matzahs obliterate the taste of the matzah's mitzvah, of the matzah's mitzvah. So therefore I can eat whatever kind of honey matzah, sponge matzah I want, but the last kizayis I eat must be real matzah. To which the Gemara says, maybe not. Lo mi bai kamar. Lo mi bai barishon the kachal l'te'avon. Maybe the Gemara means like this. It goes without saying that you could eat your kizayis of matzah's mitzvah at the beginning because you're eating it with an appetite. Ava ba'achrona da'asi lemechle achila gasa imalo. But alocha l'maisam, I might have thought that I can't go ahead and eat the real matzah last, because maybe I'll come to achila gasa, to gluttonous eating, and that's of course a problem to which the Gemara says kamash malon. No, kamash malon. Since a person knows that they're going to have to eat the afikoman, I know that I'm going to have to eat the matzah at the end, I save room, right? I know what I'm going to have to eat. Therefore, again, I gauge accordingly, or at least I'm supposed to gauge accordingly. So I'll say saloch l'maisa. So what do we do with this? So also listen to this. It's actually quite fascinating. So the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Taf Ayin Ches writes as follows. Sorry. A lot of interesting halacha today. So in Taf Ayin Ches, Shulchan Aruch says, okay, listen to this, I will say. Here we go. So the Shulchan Aruch, Taf Ayin Ches Aleph, Achar Afikoman, after you eat the afikoman. Now again, I will say, obviously, contemporarily, see, I want to point out what's fascinating over here. You see an incredible shift. Obviously, I'm skipping many steps between the Mishnah and the Mechaber, but I just want to show you what happened. In the Mishnah's context, the word afikoman is used how? What does afikoman mean in the Mishnah? Right? So it means one of two things. It either refers to a dessert or a process. Right? Either way, what doesn't it refer to? It doesn't refer to Karban Pesach or Matzah, which is just very interesting, right? Remember, according to Rav, afikoman means apikaman. You can't take your utensils from your home and go somewhere else to eat. According to Shmuel, it means you can't clear the table and bring out dessert. What we see happened over the course of generations, and that's I'm skipping the halachic process, is that word came to describe the kezayis of matzah that we eat as dessert, Zechar the Karban Pesach. It's just really fascinating. So what we call today afikoman, that refers to the kezayis of matzah that we eat Zechar the Karban Pesach at the end of the meal, right before we bench. I just want to point out that's not the original usage of the word. But again, fascinating. Achar afikoman ein lechol shum davar. We'll say that's the Shulchan Aruch Paskins. After you eat the afikoman, you should not eat anything else. You should not eat anything else. I will say, interestingly enough, the Rama points out over here, "V'lo yochlanu b'shnei makomos." You should not go ahead and eat the afikoman in two places. D'lo adif milu hefsek b'sheina d'asur la'achla mishum. So I'll say again, we'll talk about sleep in just a moment. So two halachas. Number one, we don't eat anything after afikoman. Number two, you should not eat the afikoman in two locations. Listen to the Mishnah Berurah. Ein lecho. Why don't I eat after the afikoman? Mishnah Berurah says, "Shelo yavor mipiv tam masa shel afikoman shu mitzvah al yidei tam osamachol." So we'll say salach l'maisa. So as we said in the Gemara, because I eat that kezayis matzah to remember the Karban Pesach. Karban Pesach was supposed to be the last thing I eat that night. It was nechal ala sova. So to the matzah of afikoman is the last thing I eat. The flavor is supposed to remain in my mouth. This is actually very interesting. He says, "Ubedi even." We'll say, so what happens if you did eat? Ubedi even im achal acharav shum davar yachzer v'yochel kezayis matzah shmura l'shem afikoman. So no matter how much you think that Pesach gel ring is calling your name, right? It's not worth it, right? It's not worth it. I will say, Mishnah Berurah Mamish Paskins, if you eat after afikoman, Pesach Seder is over, you decide to chap a little snack or something, you would actually have to go back and eat another kezayis matzah l'shem afikoman. A pretty dramatic halacha. Pretty dramatic halacha. Shum davar. So the Mishnah Berurah goes on. What about drinking? What about drinking? So listen to Israel. It says in Mishnah Berurah says, "Ule'in shtia nechluk poskim." Regarding drinking, the poskim are machmir. V'yesh lahachmir b'mashke hamishaker. One should be careful to not drink any drinks that have the ability to intoxicate. Ulechatchila nochon lizar mikol mashke chutz mimayim ukahai gafna. And the Mishnah Berurah says, however, really, one should be machmir with all drinks except water. Water or kai gadna, we'll say things like water. So it would apply to seltzer, sparkling water, things like this. But really, what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is, stay away from any drink that's what? Flavor. That has a flavor. That's really what it is. Stay away from anything that's very, so we'll say, really quite a fascinating halacha. So even with drinking, because again, it all makes sense. The goal is, I want the flavor of the matzah to remain in my mouth. So because of that, of course, I'm not going to eat anything. Now, the Mishnah Berurah does point out, and actually in the footnotes, Rav Nevanzal also points this out, that drinking as opposed to eating, let's say you did drink, right? Let's say you had you had another, well, wine is going to be problematic. But you have a glass of soda. You have a glass of soda, so it has a flavor. So Shlomo Zalman Paskin, under those circumstances, you would not have to go back and eat a kezayis of matzah again. It's only dafka if you eat something after the afikoman that you have to re-eat or eat another kezayis of matzah. But after drinking something flavored, you will not be obligated to eat another kezayis of matzah. Okay, so I just want to point out, so remember again, the Ramah added in over here, you also can't eat the afikoman in two locations, which we're going to discuss in greater depth. So the Mishnah Berurah points out, I will say, this is actually very important. Vuadin b'cheder echad, mikzaso b'shulchan zeh, mikzaso b'shulchan acher, dahav mishnei makomos. So I will say, it's actually very interesting. This applies even in the same room. It's really quite fascinating. Even in the same room, you should not eat the afikoman in two locations. So this is very important because, again, let's say you're having your Seder and Halavai, we'll be Zocha, hopefully, to have more people around our table this year. You know, some people left the table, you want to go sit next to this, you want to sit next to that one. The Mishnah Berurah says you really shouldn't do that. You should eat the entire kizais of the afikoman in one location. This is an incredible chiddush because, in general, when it comes in halacha to the concept of shinui makom, changing location, it never refers to the same room. But by afikoman, again, there is this hakpada that dafka be eaten literally again in one location. So it just means wherever you started the kizayis, finish the kizayis off over there. Good about that's the halacha. We'll see a little bit more shulchan aruch in just a moment. So let's go right there. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava. Rava says, what's a really incredible halacha? Amar Rava, matzah bisman hazeh d'oraisa. Incredible sugyas. Rava says, matzah bisman hazeh is d'oraisa. Right? Matzah is still a biblical obligation. Umarer dirabanan. But maror is a dirabanan. Now both say, mashnamar. Now why is that? Why is matzah d'oraisa and maror is a dirabanan? So listen to this. So the Gemara says, mashnamar, d'chsev amatos umerorim, Bisman di'ika Pesach yeshmarer, or bisman deleka Pesach leka marer. To which the Gemara says very simple. The pasuk says al matzos umerorim yochluhu. You will eat a Karban Pesach with matzah and marer, which clearly links marer to the Karban Pesach. So when there is a Karban Pesach, there is a biblical obligation for marer. No Karban Pesach, no biblical obligation for marer. Says the Gemara. 1 second. Matzah nami ksiv amatzos umerorim. So we'll say, but 1 second. If you're going to use that logic, then what? Then matzah is also dirabanan. They're both remember the same pasuk. It's the same pasuk. Al matzos umerorim yochluhu. So I understand you're saying maror is dirabanan because maror is linked to Karban Pesach. So when there's a Karban, there's maror. When there's no Karban, there's only maror dirabanan. Why can't I make the same argument by matzah? Here we go, we'll say. The Gemara is say, by the way, something that's very useful to the Gemara is because remember, this is it. It's fascinating. Oh, let's just see. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, here's the difference. Matzah mehadar bekra. Matzah has another pasuk. What's the other pasuk? Be'erev tochlu matzos. Both say the pasuk says in the evening, referring to the first night of Pesach, you shall eat the matzah. So both say, interestingly enough, even though there is a pasuk by matzah which links matzah to Karban Pesach, because matzah gets its own additional pasuk, that teaches me that the biblical obligation of matzah applies even in the absence of Karban Pesach, whereas maror has no such pasuk. Right, there's only one pasuk by maror, amatos umerorim yochluhu. So maror is only mentioned in connection with Karban Pesach. See, if there's Karban Pesach, it's d'oraisa. If there's no Karban Pesach, it's d'rabanan. But even though matzah is mentioned in connection with Karban Pesach, matzah gets its own separate pasuk as well. Rav Achar bar Yaakov Amar, Rav Achar bar Yaakov holds, echad zeh ve'echad zeh d'rabanan. So we'll say, Rav Achar bar Yaakov disagrees with Rav. So we'll say, Rav's position is, bisman hazeh, in the absence of the Beis HaMikdash, maror is d'rabanan, matzah is d'oraisa. Rav Achar bar Yaakov disagrees. He said, echad zeh ve'echad zeh d'rabanan. Both matzah and maror d'rabanan. What about the fact that matzah has its own pasuk of ba'erev tochlu matzos, elo haksiv ba'erev tochlu matzos? Rav Achar bar Yaakov, what do you do with the pasuk by matzah? Not a problem. Ha'imi boile l'tamei v'shar b'derech ha'choker. We'll say this is incredible. Ba'erev tochlu matzos is teaching you that someone who was tamei or b'derech ha'choker. We'll say, remember again, tamei b'derech ha'choker means what? First, the people who are exempt from Pesach Rishon and are going to do Pesach Sheni. We'll say, watch this. Rav Achar bar Yaakov says that Ba'erev Tochlu Matzos teaches me that even someone who is Tamei and B'derech Rechoka, and therefore exempt from Pesach Rishon, but going to have to do Pesach Sheni, still has an obligation to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach. Incredible limud. So Ba'erev Tochlu Matzos, even those people who are exempt from the Karban Pesach on Pesach Rishon, still have an obligation of matzah on Pesach Rishon. Why? What would I have thought? The Sagadai Tamina, I would have thought, Kevan de Pesach lo ochli, matzu mar nami lo nechal. Because I might have thought that once the guy who's tamei and mederech rechoka, once they are exempt from Karban Pesach and Pesach Rishon, then maybe what? They're exempt from everything. In other words, essentially, what I would have thought was their observance of Pesach is effectively deferred. Deferred division. Now, of course, it goes without saying they can't eat chametz, right? No one's positing that. But I would have thought that maybe their performance of the positive mitzvos of Pesach, Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, that's all deferred to Pesach Sheni. Kamash Molono. Kamash Rav Yaakov says that the pasuk of Ba'erev Tochlu Matzos teaches me that even if someone was Tamei or B'derech HaChoka, and therefore their Karban Pesach was deferred until Pesach Sheni, they still have an obligation to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach. The Rava, what will Rava say to this? Rava Amar Lecha, Tamei B'shai B'derech HaChoka Lo Tzarech Krat. Rava says, no. First of all, Rava says, Rav Yaakov, I agree with you that someone who is Tamei B'derech HaChoka, even though he can't offer the Pesach on Pesach Rishon, will still have to eat matzah on Pesach Rishon. I agree with that point. But you don't need a pasuk for that, and I'll tell you why. Rava Amar Lecha, Tamei v'shai b'derech choka lo tzarech kra. You don't need a pasuk to teach you that they have to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach. That's obvious. Delo gari me'arel u'benechar, because we'll say they're no different than an arel, right? They're no different than an arel. They're no different than someone who's uncircumcised. This Sanya, kol arel lo yochal bo. An arel, an uncircumcised person, can't eat karban Pesach. Bo eino ochel. Aval ochel b'matzah v'morer. Ultimately, again, teaches you that even someone who can't eat karban Pesach still eats what? Still eats matzah and maror. So what I was going to say, as much as Pesach, matzah, and maror are a package, if someone can't eat Pesach, they're still obligated to eat matzah and maror. So Rava says to Rav Yaakov, the same idea with Tamei and Derech Rechoka. Someone who's Tamei or too far away. It's true they're exempt from Karban Pesach, but Lamaisa, of course, they're going to be obligated to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach. And I don't need a pasuk of Ba'erach Tochlu Matzahs to teach me that. V'idach. So ultimately, what will Rav Yaakov respond to this? Ksiv b'hayu tzrichi. No, the Torah needs to state it both by Orel as well as by Tamei and Derech Rechoka, that ultimately, again, in both of these cases, even though a person is not offering up Karban Pesach, they're still obligated in matzah, and both cases are necessary. And both saying, according to Rav Yaakov, why are both cases necessary? If you take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment, the Rashbam says, Ksiv b'hayu tzricha, the Tamei v'shai b'derech choka lo yolaf me'arel u'benechar. Ta islay tashulma Pesach Sheni. So we'll say, essentially, what Rav Yaakov will say is, listen, the cases are not really comparable. Because Tamei and derech rechoka, technically speaking, what? Have a tashlumin. What's their tashlumin? They have a makeup date. Pesach Sheni. An arel, Rabbi say, is a disqualification that precludes you from participating in Pesach at all. The Rashbam goes on to enumerate other distinctions, but we don't have to get into it. But the point Rav Yaakov is saying is, the Torah needs to state this halacha, both by an arel, as well as by Tamei derech rechoka. V'idach, I'm sorry, Tanya Kavasi Rabbi say, Rabbi said that supports Rava. What does Rava say? Sheishes, you're supposed to remember again, Rava holds that Bisman Hazeh, Moror is D'Rabbanan, Matzah is D'Oraisa. Now watch this. Rabbi that supports Rava. Sheishes yamim tochal matzahs, or b'yom hashiyah atzeres l'Hashem Elokecha. So what's an interesting passage? The Torah says, for 6 days you shall eat matzah, and on the seventh day, it's an atzeres. It's a yom tov for Hashem. So the interesting drasha. Mashir should never say. Now the fact that the Torah says 6 days you will go and eat matzahs, and it says the seventh day is a yom tov, which tells that the seventh day I don't have to eat matzah, which we darshan. Mashir Irsho, so we'll say just like the seventh day, you don't have to eat matzah if you don't want to. Af sheishes yomim rishos. So to the previous 6 days, if you don't want to eat matzah, you don't have to eat matzah. I was about to say that there's no mitzvah to consume matzah. There's no mitzvah to consume matzah into all 7 days of Pesach. My time, what's the reason? Because listen to this. Really, if you think about this as follows, the all 7 days were originally included in one rule. Because there's another pasuk. The Rashbam quotes, the Torah says, Shivas yamim tochal matzahs. Right? The Torah first says, for 7 days you will eat matzah. Okay? Which would indicate to me that matzah is a mitzvah all 7 days. And then what happened? The Gemara says, right. My timer. Because originally the pasuk said Shivas Yom Tochal Matzos. For all 7 days you'll eat matzah. And then what happened? Then the Torah says Sheishes Yomim Tochal Matzos U'Beyom Hashiyah Atzeres L'Hashem Elokecha. Then it said, then what happened? Then another pasuk took the seventh day out of the klal, and therefore what? Havi Darshay Bechlal. The Yatsa Minat Klal. The seventh day was then removed from the klal, from the general rule. So the Gemara says, Lilah Lo lelamed al atzmo yatsa, elo lelamed ala klal kulo yatsa. So Rabbi say, this is actually quite fascinating. So Rabbi say, here's the progression. First, the Torah says, Shivas Yom Tov Matzos, which would seem to indicate that what? I have a mitzvah to consume matzah when? When? All 7 days. Then the Torah says, for 6 days you'll consume matzah, and on the 7th day is an atzeres. Which then essentially what happens is what? The Torah took out the 7th day, indicating that there's no obligation to eat matzah on the 7th day. What the Gemara now says is, once the 7th day was extracted, the 7th day comes to teach you about the previous 6 days as well. Just like the consumption of matzah on the 7th day is a reshus, is optional, so too the consumption of matzah on all previous 6 days is optional as well, which essentially tells me that matzah is optional all 7 days. You might have thought, Yachol, af Lilah harishon reshus. You might have thought, therefore, even on the first night of Pesach, the consumption of matzah is optional. Talmud lomar, al matzus umerorim yochluhu. Therefore, the pasuk says, al matzah and maror you will eat it. So we'll say, so again, which teaches me that the obligation of matzah on the first night is doraisa. But one second, Emi elo bizman shebeis mikdash kayom. I only know that matzah is doraisa when there's a current Pesach. However, the Gemara says, how do I know that halacha l'maaseh there is a mitzvah doraisa of matzah on even when there's no Beis Hamikdash? Talmud lomar ba'erev tochlu matzos. Another pasuk, we'll say third pasuk. Ba'erev tochlu matzos, actually a fourth pasuk. Ba'erev tochlu matzos, you have to eat matzos in the evening. Mitzvah, the Gemara says, akasav kavuchova. The Torah establishes the da'oraisa of matzah even when there's no Beis Hamikdash. So we'll say, what comes out of this Gemara is really incredible. Kind of working backwards a little bit. Shivas yomim tochlu matzos. So I start out, my departure point is, matzah is obligatory all 7 days. Then another pasuk, 6 days you have to eat, 7th day you don't have to eat. The fact that we pulled out the 7th day indicates to me that the 7th day is teaching about the previous 6, which is matzahs are a reshus. Well, if matzah is a reshus, is optional, maybe even on the first night it's optional, ba'erev tochlu matzahs. Right? You have to eat matzah on the first night, whether there is a current Pesach, not a current Pesach. Matzah on the first night is always mid-darais. And I will say, this is in fact how we paskin. You must eat matzah in chutz la'aretz for our purposes on the first 2 nights of Pesach. At the start, there is a mitzvah da'oraisa of matzah, but the rest of Pesach matzah is a reshus. Now I will say, there's a very interesting position of the Gra, the Vilna Gaon. So the Vilna Gaon, so lahalocha. So this is why over the course of the rest of Pesach, if you don't want to eat matzah, you don't have to eat matzah. Now of course, there's a separate din of washing by the seudos of Yom Tov, right? Of having lechem mishnah. But leaving that aside, technically speaking, if you don't want to eat matzah over the course of the rest of Pesach, you don't have to. Now the Gaon says that is true. However, when you do eat matzah over the course of Pesach, you have the ability to perform a mitzvah doraisa. Right? So it's what we call not a mitzvah chiyuvis. It's not an obligation which devolves upon you. It's a mitzvah kiyumis. That whenever you eat a kezayis of matzah over the course of Pesach, you have the ability to fulfill doraisa. And I will say, according to the Gra, that only works with what? With shmura matzah. With shmura matzah. That's why some have the custom to only eat shmura matzah over the course of Pesach. This way, again, anytime you do end up eating a kezayis of matzah over Pesach, you fulfill a mitzvah deoraisa. You're not obligated to do so. It is not a mitzvah chiyuvis, but it is a mitzvah kiyumis, according to the Gra. Every time you eat a kezayis of shmura matzah over the course of Pesach, you end up fulfilling a biblical mitzvah of ba'erev tochlu matzah. It's beautiful. We'll say next Mishnah. Yashnu, it's an interesting case. Yashnu miktsasam. This, by the way, it's amazing. Some things do not change at the Pesach Seder. Right? Someone falls asleep. Right? It's only a shaila of when. Yashnu miktsasam. So we'll say, just as an aside, we spoke about this a little bit before, this is why it really is, and all kidding aside, it's important to make sure that the Seder experience is meaningful for those who are in attendance. And sometimes it does mean going a little bit faster, right? Because if you're up to your 72nd, Dvar Torah on Karpas, right? And it's 2 a.m., so who are you benefiting? It's beautiful. You look pious and learned, but at the end of the day, who is actually gaining anything from that Pesach Seder. I will say sometimes less is more, and sometimes moving the pace, so that people don't fall asleep at the Seder. That's a sign of a good Seder. So Yashnu Miktsasan. So also, let's say you have a Chabura, because again, remember, for the current Pesach, you always have a Chabura. So let's say you have a Chabura, some members of the Chabura fell asleep. Right? So what's the halacha? Yochlu. So we'll say, so now here's what's interesting. The issue with sleep is as follows. Sleep is a hesach hadas, right? When you fall asleep, that's like a lapse of awareness. Lapse of awareness by Karban Pesach is problematic because lapse of awareness is no different than eating your Karban Pesach in two locations. So therefore, technically speaking, if when consuming the Korban Pesach, this is what it's talking about. This is when it's talking about falling asleep. If you fall asleep when eating the Pesach, that hesach hadas is the equivalent of eating the Pesach in two locations. So now the shaila is, let's say members of the Chabura fell asleep. So what happens? So the Gemara, the Mishnah says, Yashnu Miktsasan Yochlu Kulan. If only some of the members of the Chabura fell asleep, it's okay. You can go ahead. The others could go ahead and continue eating. So in other words, we'll say, this is the general din of a chabura. We'll say, it's such an incredible musar about the power of being part of a good chabura. Because sometimes when you're part of a good chavra, part of a good chabura, what you can't do for yourself, they can do for you. So maybe you fell asleep, but as long as part of the chabura is awake, it's keilu, you're awake as well, and you could continue eating the Karban Pesach when you wake back up. So yashnu mikzasan, yochlu kulan. So I'm sorry, yochlu. Kulan, but if the entire chabura falls asleep, then what? Lo yochlu. Then ultimately, I will say, so once the entire chabura falls asleep, then there's a fundamental hesach hadas on the part of the whole chabura. And what that means is when everybody wakes up from their power nap at the Seder, they can't eat any more Karban Pesach. They're done. They're done. So essentially you let the rest of it become nosar, and you burn it. You burn it. I'm a base. Rabbi Yossi says, Nisnamnu. So Yossi says like this, Nisnamnu. Rabbi say, we'll see what Nisnamnu means. Right? Dozing. So again, say that's when somebody catches you, right? And you just tell them that you're concentrating deeply on yachas, right? That was really pondering the esoteric meaning of breaking the middle mouth. So that's because the Rabbi Yossi says nisnamnu, right? If we'll see what it means. If they dozed, yochlu, then ultimately again the group could continue to eat Karban Pesach. Nirdemu. So we'll say here's what's interesting in Rabbi Yossi's model. Nirdemu, if any members of the group fell asleep, then what? Lo yochlu. Then they can't continue to do Karban Pesach. So I'll say, what I want to point out over here is as follows. The machlokes in the Tanna Kamma, Rabbi Yossi, is a very profound machlokes. According to the Tanna Kamma, even if members of the group fell asleep, as long as some part of the group stayed awake, those who fell asleep, when they awaken, have the ability to continue to do Karban Pesach. According to Rabbi Yossi, the halacha is as follows. According to Rabbi Yossi, if anyone fell asleep, we're done. Right? That's it. Anyone actually falls asleep, we're done. However, if somebody's just dozing is okay. Not encouraged, but okay. Right? Dozing is okay. That does not preclude you from going to eat Karban Pesach. Incredible machlokes. So the Gemara says as follows. So again, according to Rabbi Yossi, will say, even if some members of the Chabura fell asleep, even if others remained awake, once some fell asleep, Karban Pesach is over for everyone. HaPesach achar chatzos metame se'adayim. We'll say Karban Pesach after chatzos is ritually impure and it's metame the hands. Interesting halacha, we'll say. So Karban Pesach after chatzos becomes tamei. So the Gemara says hapigul va'nosar tmeinas hayadayim. Similarly, again, pigul and nosar also again are metame yadayim. Now we'll say, remember, we know what these halachas are. Pigul ultimately again refers to any carbon which the Kohen had erroneous machshavas. Right? Nosar is any carbon left over past its prescribed time. Now remember again, Karban Pesach after chatzos effectively becomes nosar. So therefore, Karban Pesach after chatzos is metame hayadayim, ultimately renders the hand impure. Says Rabbi Silber, let's analyze this. Rabbi Yossi Omer, nisnamnu yochlu, nirdemu lo yochlu. So also Rabbi Yossi says, and this is really interesting, according to Rabbi Yossi, it's a din ultimately in falling asleep. So according to Rabbi Yossi, even if some of the members of the Chabura fell asleep, no one could eat the Karban Pesach. If some of them just dozed, or even if all of them dozed, halacha l'maisa, you could continue to eat the Pesach. So it says the Gemara, Hechi dami nisnamni. What does it mean to doze? What does dozing mean? This is great. Hechi dami nisnamni. Amar Rav Ashi, nim velo nim tir velo tir. It means sleeping but not sleeping, awake but not awake. Right? Kigon, for example, kigon the karile va'ani. Oh, so this is great. If somebody were to call your name, so what would happen? Your head would snap back forward, right? And you would answer your name when being called. The Gemara says, "Velo yadi la dure svara," but you cannot answer any questions beyond the yes or no, right? Beyond the yes or no. So again, anything that's deeper. So we'll say what it means is a person has, we'll call it a baseline level of consciousness. The truth is, many people are like this throughout the day in general, right? Not just the din and the seder, but in general, nim below nim, tir below tir. They're kind of awake, kind of asleep, a little bit in between. You can ask them yes or no questions, but not too much deep or profound thinking going on. So the Gemara says, "V'chi mitkaru le mitkar." So interestingly enough, but when you remind a person of a fact, they'll remember. So in other words, that they don't have the ability for significant recall or for significant thought, but they're awake enough that they could correctly answer yes or no questions. And if you remind them about a fact, they could confirm that particular fact as being true. So we'll say it's actually interesting. If you look at the Rashbam says v'chi mitkru le hanachto b'makom ploni mitkar v'omer hein olav. So Rashbam gives an example. Where did you put the keys? Right? Did you put the keys in the kitchen? Did you put the keys in the entranceway? Or did you put the keys in the kitchen? Yes. Right? They can answer yes or no. So the Gemara tells the story. Abaye havi Yosef kamei de Rabba. So Abaye was once sitting in front of Rabba. Chaza te kan nimnim. Ultimately, again, he saw that Rabba was dozing. Amrle meinam kanoim. So we'll see, interestingly enough, so Abaye said it appears that Rebbe is sleeping. Meimar kanoim Amrle, to which Rabba responded, Amrle menume kamenamno. I'm not sleeping, I'm only dozing. Utnan, and we learned in the Mishnah, because they were having Pesach Seder together, and we learned in the Mishnah, Nisnamnu yochlu, nirdimu lo yochlu. So ultimately, again, really what Rabbi was saying to Abaye was, don't worry, I was just dozing, I didn't fall asleep, and therefore we could continue to eat the Karban Pesach. Incredible. So we'll say, I just want to point out, really, there is a muster in this, which is about sometimes we do kind of slumber through life. Right, we do kind of just slumber, where I'm awake but not really awake. I'm doing stuff, but there's not so much thought to it. I don't really think about myself. I don't think about my life. I don't think about where I'm going. And again, remember, when you're misnamneim, when you're dozing, you could accomplish actually most of the activities of daily living. So you could go to work, and you could get your job done, and you could go home, and you could go through the cycle of the day, but without really any significant thought, and you could get by. And all kidding aside, there are people who get through life in a state of dozing, awake enough to answer basic questions, awake enough to interact on a minimal level, awake enough to get the job done, but dozing to the point that they don't give any significant thought to life. And I will say the yesod, of course, of successful living is to be awake at all times, and even to be awake when you're sleeping, right? Even to be awake certainly during your waking hours, and to live life with an awareness, and to live life with deep thought, and to live life. I will say, if somebody were to ask you, that, the Lasson over here is so profound. The Gemara says, "The karile va'ani," right? Velo yada lahadure svara. So, right, when you're dozing, so if somebody calls you, you could answer, but you don't know how to go ahead and give any type of depthful answers. Svara, no deeper reasoning. So let's think about this just a moment. If somebody were to stop me and to ask me, what's your goal in life? What's your goal in life? So I will say, could I answer that question? Could I answer, what's your goal? What's your goal? How are you going to measure if you led a successful life or not? What's your metric for success in your personal life? If you were to leave the world today, would you have led a success life, not led a success life? I will say, can I answer that question? Not with the whole Torah, not with the whole, sometimes the way we answer questions is by not answering it, but we just talk long enough that the person who asked the question is just so tired of listening to me that they think I've answered the question, but I actually haven't answered the question. Could you answer the question, what's your goal in life? What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to accomplish? What do you want to do? How do you want to make your mark in this world? How do you want to make, who are you? Who are you? What do you want to be? Can I answer that question? I think a lot of times in life, we can't answer that question. Because a lot of times in life, we're just solely focused on, what am I doing today? What do I have to get done today? But we often lack kind of more global thought about who we want to be, what we want to be, and what we want to accomplish. The Gemara says, that's nim velo nim, tir velo tir. So I'm dozing. The sign if you're awake is if somebody asks you the profound questions of life. Who are you? What do you want to be? And what do you want to accomplish? If you can answer that question in one sentence or less, then you're awake. If I can't answer that question, then I may be in a state of misnamnein, and it's time to shake myself out of the slumber. The Gemara goes weiter. HaPesach acher chatzos mitamei hayadayim. Pesach after midnight is mitamei the hands. Alma mechatzos havelinosar. I just want to point out, by the way, we'll see. Alma mechatzos havelinosar. So we'll say, what do you see from here? After chatzos, after midnight, Karban Pesach is nosar. Now remember, this is the subject of a dramatic machlokes. Mantanos, whose opinion is this? Rav Yosef, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yosef, because why? What was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah say? This sanyo, va'achles habasar b'Lilah hazeh. You'll eat the basar Karban Pesach on this night. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer, ne'emar kan b'Lilah hazeh, v'ne'emar lahalon, v'avartir and sayim b'Lilah hazeh. Both said the Torah uses the word hazeh, same word in two different contexts. Number one, Karban Pesach, va'achlas habasar b'Lilah hazeh, and by makas bechoros. By makas bechoros. That's the first point, the last of the 10 plagues. The pasuk says, va'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim b'Lilah hazeh, and I will pass through Egypt on this night. Hazeh. Both say, when did makas bechoros happen? Malahalan ad chatzos. Makas bechoros happened at chatzos. Afkan ad chatzos. So too, Karban Pesach can only be consumed until chatzos. It's Gzeira Shava. Hazeh, from Karban Pesach to Makas Bechoros. So both say, this is the position of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. That Allah Chalamaysa Karban Pesach can only be consumed until chatzos. Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, 1 second. Valo ne'emar chipazon. But the pasuk says incredible. It ties into our Shabbos Shuvah drush from yesterday. What did the pasuk say? The pasuk says that you should go ahead. Va'achaltem oso bechipazon. You shall eat the Karban Pesach bechipazon, which Rabbi said literally means what? In haste. And we darshan from that at shas chipazon, that you can go ahead and eat Karban Pesach until when? Until the moment of haste. Now we'll say the moment of haste refers to what? When we left Egypt. When did we leave Egypt? Daybreak, at Shas Chipazon. Ultimately, again, we went ahead and we ate. If you look at the Rashbam, it's the second wide line, Shas Chipazon, Shenech Pazul, says, V'hainu Amud HaShachar, dawn. We left Egypt at dawn. So again, says Rabbi Akiva, the Torah says you should eat Karban Pesach bechipazon. And bechipazon means until the time of haste. We left Egypt with haste. When did we leave in haste? Alos HaShachar, dawn. So fundamental machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah telling me that I can only eat Karban Pesach until midnight. Rabbi Akiva is saying you can eat Karban Pesach until dawn. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Im Kain, Ma Talmud Lomar Lilah. So Rabbi Akiva, if that's the case, that you can eat Karban Pesach until dawn, so then why does the Torah say Lilah, that you can eat the Karban Pesach at night? I'll tell you why. Says Rabbi Akiva, because Yachol Yeinechol Ki Kachim Bayom, you might have thought that because the Karban Pesach, like other karbanos, could be consumed by day, Talmud Lomar Lilah, therefore the Torah says Karban Pesach can only be consumed by night. Karban Pesach could only be consumed by night and not by day. But Rabbi Akiva, Hi Hazeh, my Avidle. What does Rabbi Akiva do with the word Hazeh? Because we will say, remember again, according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he learns that Gzeira Shava of Hazeh from what? From Karban Pesach to Makas Bechoros. Just like Makas Bechoros was at Chatzos, so to Karban Pesach can only be consumed until Chatzos. What does Rabbi Akiva do with the Hazeh? We'll say, here we go. So the Gemara says, wow. According to Rabbi Akiva, Hazeh comes to teach you that Karban Pesach can only be consumed for one night and not 2 nights. Why? The Sakadai Chamina, because I would have thought, Holu Pesach Kachim Kalim, Mushlam Kachim Kalim. Just like Pesach is Kachim Kalim, right? So remember, Kachim Kalim refers to Karbanos of lesser sanctity. So Karban Pesach is in the Kachim Kalim family. Mashlamim Nechal Shnei Yamim. So we'll say, so really Karban Pesach is like a shlamim. What's the halacha by shlamim? Mashlamim Nechal Shnei Yam v'Lilah Echad. Shlamim are consumed for what? 2 days and 1 night. Af Pesach. Okim leilos b'makom yomim, ve'inechal l'shnei leilos v'yom echad. So I would have thought that since Karban Pesach is in the Shlamim family, you just flip it. Whereas a regular Shlamim has 2 days and 1 night, Karban Pesach has what? 2 nights and 1 day. 2 nights in 1 day. Therefore, again, kasav rachmana hazeh. Therefore, the Torah comes along to say hazeh, to teach me what? That Karban Pesach can only be consumed for 1 night. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah Amar Lacha. So where does Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah learn this from? Miloso siromeno ad boker nafgar. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah says you can't. The pasuk says you can't leave over the carbon until the morning, which indicates to us that obviously Karban Pesach can only be consumed for 1 night. To which the Gemara says Rabbi Akiva Amar Lacha ilo ksiv rachmana hazeh. If the Torah would have not said hazeh, hava mina my boker, I would have thought when the Torah says you can't leave it over until the morning, what does morning refer to? My boker sheni. I would have thought that refers to the second morning. For Rabbi Lazar, notice that again, the halacha would be, you could eat for 2 nights in 1 day, and when it says don't leave it over to the morning, it means this morning after the second night. Rabbi Lazar, Amar Lacha, Kalecha, the custom of boker rishonu. To which Rabbi Lazar says, no. Whenever the Torah says boker always means what? Boker always means the first morning. The first morning. Let's finish off with this last piece. Shabbosai, I just want to point out, we've seen this machlokes before. This is a fundamental machlokes. Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. When can you eat the Karban Pesach? Until Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah is saying until Chatzos. Rabbi Akiva is saying ultimately again until Alos Hashachar, until dawn. Rabbi let's finish up. Amar Rava, Achal Matzah Bizman Hazeh. Actually, Rabbi we'll stop over here. We'll pick up Emirat Hashem with this Amar Rava tomorrow. We'll see the halacha l'maisa. Shkar Rabbi. Beautiful. Chevron Zoom. Great schus with all of you. Mamish, incredible. Have a great day, everyone.